You were lied to, not by some cartoonishly evil villain, not by some random trickster, but by Disney. And the worst part is this: you asked to be lied to. You pressed play. You sang along. You got emotional. You watched the sunset, the stars, the music, the reunion, and you walked away convinced that scene was about love. But today, right here, I want to prove something to you. Can you feel the love tonight? Maybe one of the most beautiful lies Disney ever sold with a smile on its face. Because if you stay with me until the end, you're going to realize that Nala was not just a sweet childhood crush wandering the savannah in search of her soulmate. She was a revolutionary, a soldier, a woman desperate enough, sharp enough, and emotionally disciplined enough to recruit a traumatized prince, push him back toward a throne he abandoned, and turn a romantic reunion into a political instrument, to overthrow a dictator and save an entire kingdom from collapse. Love? Love was decoration. Survival was the real story. And before you click away thinking I'm being too cynical, that I'm ripping apart your childhood for no reason, hear me out. This isn't just a video about the Lion King, it's a video about you, about me, about all of us, about the decisions we make in life that we call love, calling, passion, destiny, choice. When sometimes, if we stop long enough to look honestly, they were survival decisions. They were responses to pressure. They were moves made inside structures we did not design. And we call them love because love sounds beautiful, while necessity sounds brutal. So let's do something unusual. Let's take this film apart layer by layer. Let's walk back into the savannah, sit down beside Nala, and ask what was really happening in a story you thought you already understood. Let's strip away the music for a second. Let's remove the glow. Let's stop letting nostalgia do the thinking for us. Because once you do that, this movie changes. The scene changes. Nala changes. Simba changes. Even the song changes. And what's left underneath is not a fairy tale. It's a crisis. It starts where it has to start. When Simba runs, when Simba flees that gorge after being manipulated into believing he caused his father's death. The movie wants your first reaction to be emotional, and that reaction is valid. The grief is real. The pain is real. The tragedy is real. But politically speaking, structurally speaking, what happens in that moment is even bigger than grief. The kingdom loses its king and its heir almost simultaneously. Mufasa dies, and Simba disappears. In a monarchy, that is not only a family tragedy. It is a state emergency. It is a succession collapse. It is the kind of institutional vacuum that destroys stable systems in an instant. Imagine a huge corporation losing its CEO and the only recognized successor at the same time, during an internal power struggle, while the most resentful executive in the building is already standing at the boardroom door. What happens next? The strongest opportunist takes the room. The one most willing to use chaos takes power. And in Pride Rock, that man was Scar. Scar does not inherit the throne through moral legitimacy. He inherits it through timing, manipulation, and absence of resistance. That matters because power does not always flow to the most capable, the most beloved, or the most rightful. Very often it flows to whoever is standing closest to the vacuum when the old structure collapses. Scar understood that better than anyone. He did not merely want the throne. He understood that once the legal line of succession was broken, he had a window. And windows like that do not stay open forever. Now, look at what Scar does after he takes power. He invites the hyenas in, not one or two, not as a temporary alliance. He opens the kingdom to them. He gives them access, territory, permission, place. And if you were a kid watching this movie, you probably saw that as villain behavior in the simplest sense. The bad guy gathers his creepy followers. But that's not all it is. Politically, Scar is doing something very recognizable. He is building a support base that is loyal to him personally, not to Mufasa's memory, not to the old order, not to tradition, but to him. The hyenas were Scar's private army. They were his enforcement apparatus, his loyal class of beneficiaries. They had been excluded from the old system, and Scar weaponized that exclusion. He offered them inclusion in exchange for allegiance. That is how a lot of ugly political systems work in the real world. A leader identifies a marginalized group, promises them access, revenge, dignity, food, or place, and in return secures a force that depends on him to survive. It is not generosity. It is transactional power. Scar understands the oldest rule of authoritarian politics. You do not need everyone to love you. You just need the right people to need you. That is why the hyenas matter so much. They are not comic sidekicks. They are the regime. They are the machine that allows Scar to rule. They are the incentive structure beneath his authority. They are the reason fear becomes sustainable. And once they are feeding inside the borders of Pridelands, the entire ecological logic of the kingdom starts to die. This is where the film becomes far more sophisticated than it gets credit for. The decay of the Pridelands is not only an aesthetic choice designed to tell children that things are sad now. It is a full ecological collapse. The grass disappears. The water dries up. The herds leave or get slaughtered. The color drains out of the land. The predators consume without balance, and the system that once sustained life begins to cannibalize itself. That is not just symbolism. That is a real model of what happens when power abandons stewardship and becomes extraction. Under Mufasa, there was at least the idea of balance. Under Scar, there is appetite without limit. And appetite without limit always destroys the future to satisfy the present. When prey populations collapse, predators do not become victorious. They become doomed. When the ecosystem breaks, no one really wins. Not even the ones who seem to be winning in the short term. Scar's regime is not merely evil. It is unsustainable. It consumes the kingdom's living capital like it is infinite. It treats the land as if tomorrow does not exist. And right there, in the middle of that collapse, are the lions who stayed. Sarabi, Nala, the lionesses, the ones who kept living inside the ruins because they had memory there, bonds there, history there, and because leaving is never as simple as people imagine when they are watching from safety. Maybe they stayed at first because they hoped things would improve. Maybe they believed the old order could somehow reassert itself. Maybe they simply had nowhere else to go. But what matters is this: they watched the kingdom die in slow motion, and slow collapse does something to people. It strips sentimentality out of them. It changes the scale of their thinking. It makes them practical. It makes them cold in the most human possible way. When you have seen the water disappear and the children go hungry, you stop asking what is poetic and start asking what works. That is the soil out of which the real Nala emerges. Not the soft, focused childhood sweetheart version. Not the romanticized reunion version. The real one. The one built by scarcity. This is where I think most people fundamentally misunderstand her. They treat Nala like she exists to complete Simba's emotional arc. Like she is an accessory to his hero's journey. Like she is there to remind him of who he was and reward him for becoming who he should be. But if you actually track her decisions, Nala is doing something much harder and much braver than simply loving the protagonist. She leaves. And leaving matters. Nala does not take a sentimental stroll through the savannah. She escapes a dying kingdom under hostile control. She gets past hyena surveillance. She crosses unknown territory. She enters risk. She gambles her life on the possibility of finding an answer. That is not romance. That is mission logic. That is someone who has reached the point where staying still is more dangerous than moving. That is someone who has stopped waiting for rescue and decided to become action. Think about what kind of mental state that requires. Nala is not daydreaming when she leaves. She is not led by a feeling. She is responding to a calculation born out of desperation. If she finds help, maybe there is hope. If she does not, then she, Sarabi, the remaining lionesses, and the entire kingdom likely disappear under famine and tyrannical misrule. Her journey is not emotional wandering. It is a strategic act under catastrophic pressure. And now we have to ask the real question: what exactly was she looking for? At the most obvious level, yes, she was looking for food, safety, maybe allies, maybe another place to survive. But beneath that practical surface, what she needed was legitimacy. She needed a solution that could end Scar's rule without plunging the kingdom into another vacuum. Because removing a dictator is not enough. if you cannot stabilize what comes next. History is full of tyrants who fell only for their countries to descend into chaos because there was no accepted structure waiting on the other side. Nala needed the legal heir, not just a lion, not just muscle, not just help. She needed the one figure whose return could collapse Scar's authority from within. She needed Simba not as a boyfriend, but as a constitutional instrument, as a symbol, as the missing piece in the power structure. She needed someone who did not merely have strength, but recognition. Because if Scar fell without a legitimate successor stepping into place, then the kingdom would still be exposed to instability. The old usurpation would just become a new crisis. That changes everything about her reunion with Simba. Because when she finds him, she does not find a man she can simply love. She finds the only remaining key to political restoration. And the movie hides this under one of the most charming songs ever written. That is the trick. That is the genius of the deception. Disney wraps a crisis negotiation in moonlight and melody and lets you call it romance. Look carefully at that first encounter. Their first instinct is not tenderness, it is confrontation. They clash. They struggle. Their bodies recognize threat before memory. Only afterward comes recognition. Only afterward does the past step into the room. And when recognition happens, people interpret Nala's reaction as pure emotional overflow. But I think there is another layer in her face. Relief. Strategic relief. The kind of relief a commander might feel when the last possible reinforcement actually shows up. It is not that she feels nothing. I do not think that at all, but feeling something is not the same as being driven by it. She can be moved, happy, shaken, and still understand exactly what Simba represents. The point is not that Nala was fake. The point is that she was focused. There is a huge difference. Then comes the song. The stars. The warm colors. The intimacy. The framing that tells you how to feel before you have time to think. Can you feel the love tonight? Does an incredible amount of ideological work in this movie. It takes a high-stakes convergence between necessity and unresolved attachment and packages it as romantic inevitability. It reframes strategy as destiny. It makes a kingdom's survival look like chemistry. Take the music away for a moment. Just remove it in your mind. Without the song, what do you have? You have a woman hardened by years of collapse, finding the one person whose existence could undo a dictatorship. You have a man physically grown but emotionally frozen, living in exile under a philosophy that is less wisdom than anesthesia. You have two people who do share history, attraction, affection, and memory, yes, but who are meeting under conditions shaped by power, trauma, famine, and obligation. That is not simple romance. That is a collision between need and avoidance. And this is where people get uncomfortable, because we love clear categories. We want love to be love and strategy to be strategy. We want truth to divide neatly. But human beings do not work that way. Real life is messier. Sometimes we love the person we also need. Sometimes we need the person we genuinely love. Sometimes survival sharpens desire instead of canceling it. Sometimes attraction becomes part of the toolkit through which history moves. That does not make the feeling false. It just means the feeling is not the whole story. Nala probably did feel something real for Simba. I believe that. But what pushed her out of Pride Lands? What made her cross that dangerous landscape? What made her seize the opportunity when she found him? Not love, necessity. And that difference matters because necessity changes the moral geometry of the scene. Now, let's talk about Simba, because Simba is the other half of this equation, and without understanding him, you cannot understand what Nala is actually doing. When Nala finds Simba, she does not find a hero in hiding. She finds a walking trauma response. She finds a prince who grew into a lion's body but remained emotionally trapped in the unresolved guilt of a child. Hakuna Matata is presented as a philosophy of freedom, but psychologically it functions like a coping mechanism. It is what you build when pain is so overwhelming that instead of processing it, you reorganize your life around not touching it. You lower the volume on reality. You distract yourself. You create a world where responsibility cannot reach you. Simba did not heal in the jungle. He hid there. He did not process Mufasa's death. He did not confront what happened. He did not reclaim his name. He did not examine the lie that drove him away. He simply found a place where memory hurt less and turned that place into an identity. That is not wisdom. That is avoidance made comfortable. It feels healthy because it is peaceful, but peace built on denial is always temporary. The past waits. So when Nala appears, she is not just a former friend or a lost love. She is the return of reality. She is proof that everything Simba buried is still alive somewhere beyond the edge of his chosen life. The kingdom still exists. The wound still exists. The role still exists. And worst of all for him, the consequences of his absence still exist. Watch the emotional tension in their conversation after the song. Simba is clearly affected by her. He is drawn to her. He is happy to see her. But the second she says he has to come back, the emotional register changes completely. Because return, for Simba, is not a change of location, it is the collapse of his escape structure. It means facing guilt, facing scar, facing the sight of trauma, facing the possibility that the years he spent saying no worries were not liberation, but surrender. That is why Simba resists so hard. He wants Nala, but he does not want what she represents. He wants reunion without responsibility. He wants connection without consequence. He wants to keep the emotional reward while avoiding the moral demand. In other words, he wants the part of the story Disney told you was the whole story. Nala refuses that version, and this is one of the strongest things about her character. She does not let the moment dissolve into sentiment. She insists, she presses, she reminds, she confronts. She uses their history, the suffering of the kingdom, the memory of Mufasa, and Simba's own buried identity to force the issue. She is not there to make him feel better. She is there to make him move. People often hear that and rush to the word manipulation, and maybe, in some sense, it is manipulation. But that word can be too shallow for situations like this. Because manipulation suggests selfish distortion. While Nala is dealing in truth, the kingdom is dying. Scar is a tyrant. Simba is the rightful heir. He does bear responsibility whether he likes it or not. Everything she says is true. What she does strategically is arrange those truths in the order most likely to break through his defenses. And sometimes that is what moral courage looks like. Sometimes telling the truth gently is not enough. Sometimes the stakes are too high for softness to be the highest virtue. Sometimes, if you love someone and the world they belong to is burning, the most caring thing you can do is become unbearable. Imagine if Nala had done the opposite. Imagine if she had met Simba, understood he was afraid, and decided not to push him. Imagine she said, "I understand. Stay here. Protect your peace." That would be emotionally kind in the immediate sense. It would also be a death sentence for Pride Lands. Scar would remain, the lionesses would starve. The kingdom would continue collapsing. So, what would kindness mean then? Was she supposed to prioritize Simba's comfort over everyone else's survival? This is exactly why Nala becomes so much more interesting when you stop seeing her as a love interest and start seeing her as a political actor. She is not passive. She is not decorative. She is not waiting around to complete a man. She is the one carrying urgency into the story. She is the one dragging history back into motion. Without her, Simba may never return. Without her, there is no restoration. Without her, the entire ending might never happen. That deserves a lot more respect than the girl Simba ends up with. If you're still with me this far, take a second to like the video and leave a comment, because this kind of deep reading only spreads if the algorithm realizes people are actually engaging with it. And if this analysis is changing the way you look at the film, stay with me, because we're about to get to the part that pushes the whole interpretation even further. Let's talk about why Simba actually goes back. A lot of people flatten Simba's return into romance. They assume Nala rekindled his feelings, reminded him of home, and that was enough. But the movie itself gives you a more complicated answer. Simba's decision is a convergence. It is Nala's pressure, yes, But it is also accumulated guilt finally cracking open. It is Rafiki forcing him to stop treating the past like something dead. It is Mufasa's image tearing through the sky and calling him back to his own name. It is identity, shame, grief, memory, and duty all colliding at once. Nala is the spark, but she is not the whole fire. The wood had been dry for years. The guilt had been waiting. The self he abandoned had been waiting. The story he tried not to live had been waiting. Nala simply arrives at the exact moment when the emotional architecture of escape can no longer hold. And that matters because if Simba returns mainly for love, then The Lion King becomes a love story with political wallpaper. But if he returns because responsibility and identity finally overpower his avoidance, then the romance is secondary. Important, yes. Human, yes. Beautiful, yes. But secondary, the central movement of the film is not boy gets girl. It is heir reclaims the burden of legitimacy. Now, let's jump to the end, because this is where the romantic reading really starts to fall apart. Under pressure, Scar dies, Simba takes the throne. The rain returns. The land begins to heal. The famous image of restoration arrives, and the film gives you closure through symmetry. But then, later, we get the final image of continuity, Nala holding a cub, while Rafiki presents the next generation to the kingdom. Most people watch that and see emotional completion. Family, love, the circle continues. And all of that is there, but politically, socially, institutionally, that scene is much bigger than a happy family moment. A kingdom has just survived dictatorship, ecological collapse, famine, and succession crisis. What does such a kingdom need after the tyrant falls? It needs stability. It needs public legitimacy. It needs continuity. It needs a visible answer to the question, who rules now, and what happens after them? Because if there is no answer, fear remains. People may celebrate the dictator's defeat, but uncertainty can still tear a recovering society apart. That final presentation of the cub is not just sentimental. It is a state signal. It is a public declaration that the line of succession has been restored. There is a king. There is a queen. There is an heir. The structure continues. The vacuum is closed. The future exists again. That means the union between Simba and Nala cannot be read only as romantic closure. It is also a political settlement, a marriage of restoration, a bond that consolidates legitimacy and rebuilds confidence in the continuity of rule. Simba brings the direct bloodline of Mufasa. Nala brings the surviving internal continuity of the kingdom, the lioness who stayed, endured, resisted, and carried the memory of what had to be saved. Together, they do not just form a couple, they stabilize a monarchy. In human history, there's a very old name for that: a state marriage. State marriages were not primarily about individual fulfillment. They were about alliance, continuity, legitimacy, peace, succession, stability. Kings and queens often married in ways shaped by the needs of the realm rather than the desires of the heart. That does not mean they never loved. Sometimes affection grew, sometimes it did not. But love was not the only metric, and often not even the first. The kingdom came first. Once you look through that lens, Simba and Nala's ending looks completely different. The movie packages it as the natural blossoming of childhood love, but structurally, it functions like a necessary political union. A traumatized, exiled heir returns, defeats the usurper, reclaims the throne, marries the most significant surviving lioness, aligned with the old order, and produces an heir whose public presentation reaffirms dynastic continuity. That is not just romance. That is regime repair. And no, saying that does not make their bond less meaningful. That is an important point. People hear political and assume, therefore, fake. That is not what I am saying. I am saying meaning and function coexist. Affection and duty coexist. Love and necessity coexist. But if you erase the necessity, you erase the depth of what was actually at stake. This is where Disney's genius really shows. The company takes hard structures and softens them with music. It takes social necessity and translates it into personal feeling. It takes alliances born under pressure and presents them as destiny. And because the songs are beautiful, because the animation is gorgeous, Because the storytelling is emotionally honest in some ways, we accept the package and forget to inspect the wiring underneath. Now I want to move beyond the movie, because if this analysis stays inside Pridelands, it remains interesting, but it doesn't become useful. The real reason this matters is not because of lions. It's because of us. How many decisions in your life did you describe as pure choice when they were actually constrained responses to circumstance? How many times have you told yourself a prettier version of your own story because the raw version would be harder to sit with? How often did you say, "I followed my heart," when, in truth, your heart was operating inside a system of pressures, fears, expectations, timing, loneliness, economics, and survival? Think about marriage first, because the parallel is obvious. How many people get married not because they encountered some undeniable cosmic certainty, but because time was passing, families were asking questions, friends were settling down, loneliness was getting heavier, and the fear of being left behind started to outweigh the uncertainty they felt? That does not automatically make those marriages fake or bad. Many of them become deep, real, functional, loving partnerships. But are they always the product of unconstrained freedom? Of course not. They are often a mixture of affection, timing, social pressure, fear, practicality, and hope. That does not invalidate the love. It complicates it, and human beings hate complexity. We would much rather tell clean stories. We call comfort destiny. We call timing fate. We call social alignment compatibility, as if it existed outside structure. We do this because raw necessity feels unromantic, and people need romance in order to live with themselves. That's not evil. It's human. Narrative is one of the main ways we survive reality. Disney did exactly that for you with Simba and Nala. It took an alliance forged under ecological and political crisis, wrapped it in the most gorgeous romantic language imaginable, and let you feel like you were watching love in its purest form. And it worked so well that decades later, many people still hear that song and think of intimacy, not recruitment, devotion, not restoration, love, not statecraft. But let's go beyond marriage. How many people chose their careers because they were passionate? And how many chose because that path paid the bills, satisfied the family, looked respectable, or simply seemed safer than the alternatives? How many doctors wanted to be painters? How many lawyers wanted to teach? How many engineers wanted to write songs? How many people woke up inside lives they can justify but never fully chose in the romantic sense of the word? Not because someone violently forced them, but because the system narrowed the field so gradually and so thoroughly that one option began to feel like the only reasonable choice. That is not so different from Nala. No one marched her out of Pridelands at spear point. No one issued a formal command. But what options did the structure actually leave her? Stay and slowly die? Wait for Scar to become benevolent? Pretend the ecological collapse was temporary? Or leave, risk everything, and search for the only force that might break the system? Within the field available to her, she made the rational move. That is not pure freedom. That is constrained agency. And most adult decisions look exactly like that. We live in a world obsessed with the language of freedom. We are constantly told we are choosing, deciding, building, manifesting, becoming. And yes, on one level, we are. But on another level, all those choices happen inside structures we did not design. Your neighborhood affects your school. Your school affects your references. Your references affect what you think is possible. What you think is possible affects what you attempt. What you attempt affects who you meet. Who you meet affects your opportunities. Your opportunities shape your money, your city, your relationships, your confidence, and the options your children will one day inherit. That is not a prison, exactly. But it is not freedom in the romantic sense either. It is a structure, a web, a system of patterned possibilities. And within that system, most of us do what Nala did and what Simba eventually did. We make the best move we can with the cards we are actually holding, not the ones we wish we had. That is why this reading of The Lion King feels uncomfortable. Because once you see Nala not as the one he loves, but as the one who understood the stakes first, it becomes harder to maintain the fantasy that our own lives are powered only by feeling. Suddenly, the movie is not just a childhood memory. It is a mirror, and the mirror asks dangerous questions. How many of your biggest choices were really yours, in the deepest sense? How many were made by the version of you that had already been shaped by fear, class, family, geography, hunger, ambition, duty, trauma, and timing? How many were expressions of desire, and how many were attempts to survive with dignity? There is no easy answer to that. I am not pretending there is, and I am definitely not saying that once you become aware of structure, you become free from it. Awareness is not magic. Consciousness does not instantly liberate you from history. But it gives you one thing that matters enormously: honesty. And honesty changes the quality of your life, even if it does not erase the pressures acting on it. Because once you can name the forces shaping your decisions, you stop living entirely inside the lie that everything was spontaneous and pure. You stop confusing adaptation with destiny. You stop pretending every practical compromise was a sacred calling. You stop insulting your own intelligence with stories that sound prettier than they are true. That is why I don't actually think this interpretation destroys the beauty of The Lion King. I think it matures it. It gives Nala back the complexity she deserves. It lets Simba be more than a romantic lead. It turns Scar into more than a theatrical villain. It allows the kingdom itself to matter as a system, not just a backdrop. And it reminds us that stories become deeper, not weaker, when we admit that love is often braided together with duty, survival, fear, timing, and politics. Was Nala fully honest with Simba? Maybe not in every emotional sense. Maybe she did wrap necessity in familiarity. Maybe she understood that if she approached him purely as a political argument, she might fail. Maybe she knew memory and attraction could soften the walls around his avoidance. But if she did, does that make her less admirable? Honestly, I think it makes her more real, more intelligent, more human. Because what did she actually do? She looked at a kingdom in collapse and refused passivity. She did not wait for a miracle. She did not romanticize helplessness. She did not sit in Pride Lands hoping someone else would become brave. She crossed the world. She found the one person who could matter. She confronted his fear. She held the line against his refusal. She dragged him back toward history. And through that act, she helped save an entire realm. That is not the role of a decorative love interest. That is the role of a strategist. And maybe the most powerful thing about all of this is how often the real heroes in history are not the ones who stand on the rock at the end, roaring in the storm. Sometimes the real heroes are the ones who made that final scene possible, the ones who recognized the necessary move earlier than everyone else, the ones who accepted being misunderstood, the ones who turned emotion into leverage, the ones who acted while others were still grieving, denying, hiding, or waiting. Simba defeats Scar, yes. Simba reclaims the throne, yes. Simba is the visible hero, but if Nala never leaves, never searches, never pressures, never refuses his escape, then maybe there is no final battle at all. Maybe there is no restoration. Maybe the rightful king remains in emotional exile forever, while the kingdom dies of his absence. That is why I want you to watch that song differently from now on. The next time Can You Feel the Love Tonight begins, I want you to hear not just beauty, but camouflage. I want you to see not just chemistry, but urgency. I want you to look at Nala and understand that beneath the glow, beneath the softness, beneath the nostalgia, there is a woman running a last, desperate strategy in the middle of civilizational collapse. A woman using every resource available to her: memory, affection, truth, timing, and pressure. And that does not make the scene smaller. It makes it enormous. Because now, it is not just about whether two lions still have feelings for each other. It is about what human beings do when tenderness and necessity collide. It is about how often survival borrows the language of love in order to move people where they need to go. It is about the stories we tell to get through the unbearable. And it is about the fact that sometimes the person who looks like the romantic lead is actually the sharpest political mind in the room. If that changes the movie for you, good. It should. Not because we need to become cynical, not because everything beautiful is secretly fake, but because growing up sometimes means learning that beauty and brutality often coexist. The song can still be gorgeous. The scene can still move you. The bond between Simba and Nala can still contain real affection. None of that disappears. What disappears is the childish illusion that affection alone explains everything important. And honestly, maybe that is the most useful lesson hidden inside the whole story. Very few of the most important choices in life come from one clean emotion. Most come from tangled motives. Love, fear, duty, trauma, hope, pressure, ambition, loyalty, timing, loneliness, responsibility. We act from all of them at once, then we choose afterward which one gets to narrate the memory. That is what people do. That is what stories do. That is what Disney does, and that is what makes this movie more truthful than it first appears. So no, Nala was not just the hero's girlfriend. She was the one who recognized the political reality before anyone else. She was the one who turned that recognition into movement. She was the one willing to make emotional contact carry strategic weight. She was the one brave enough to leave, smart enough to identify the real solution, and strong enough to force history back into motion when the rightful king would have preferred to keep hiding. And if we're being honest, that is a lot more impressive than simply being in love. So the next time you watch The Lion King and Nala steps into frame with that look in her eyes, I want you to remember this. I want you to see underneath the pastel version Disney sold you. I want you to see the fighter, the planner, the survivor, the woman who crossed the savannah hungry, scared, and focused because waiting politely for fate to fix things was never going to save anyone. She deserves more than to be remembered as the childhood crush who got the prince in the end. She deserves to be remembered as one of the smartest, bravest, and most deeply human characters Disney ever created, whether the movie itself fully realized that or not. And this video is not just for her. It is for everyone who has ever made a difficult decision and later wrapped it in a prettier story so they could carry it. It is for anyone who has done what had to be done instead of what they wanted. It is for anyone who has borne a burden they never asked for because somebody had to. It is for anyone who has looked back at the path behind them and wondered whether, under different conditions, they would have made a different choice. Maybe you would have, maybe you wouldn't, but you made the one you made, and here you are. If this changed the way you see the film, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to watch The Lion King with new eyes, and tell me in the comments whether you think Nala was in love, in survival mode, or both, because the most interesting stories are often the ones that stop being simple the second we dare to look at them honestly. And I'll see you in the next one.